the ploughs came before dawn, moaning up the hill like old ships pushing through black water. Their amber beacons turned the drifts to something liquid and deep, and the wind carried their sound away until it seemed not to exist at all. Pine Hollow woke this way every morning in December, inside a moving silence broken only by machinery and breath. Marlin Dyer drove the lead truck. He was 62 and moved with the economy of a man who'd lifted the same shovel since the Carter years. His beard had gone from fox red to ash, and a notch in one ear ached when storms were coming. The radio on his dash was tuned to the county weather station, which muttered warnings that were mostly blizzard poetry. Arctic flow, lake effect, visibility near zero. The plough's blade bit into the drift, threw a wall of snow over the guardrail, and the world behind him returned to a blank sheet. The hill leveled at the crest. He eased the truck to idle and squinted across the flats, where the town lay in its bowl of dark firs and bare birch, roofs tucked and under white like sleeping animals. Even from here, he could see the church steeple, its bell a black silhouette against low clouds. No one rang it anymore, not in December, not on purpose. Marlin downshifted and let the truck crawl forward. The second blade, driven by a kid named Tully with cheekbones like the side of a hatchet, came into his mirrors. Tully lifted 2 fingers. Marlin lifted 2 back. They took the descent slow, the way you do when you're driving into a memory you already know by heart. 3 minutes later, the blade struck something that wasn't snow. The truck shuddered. Marlin cursed, braked, and lifted. A dark comma had been carved in the roadbed, shallow but wrong. He left the cab and the cold folded around him. Real cold. Not the kind you posture against, but the kind that closes the door and bolts it. The sky had that bruised pre-dawn colour that made you feel like any light you carried was stolen. He walked to the strike mark. A knuckle of ice protruded through the hard pack, clear as glass, with something caught inside it. He scraped with his glove, and then with the short steel pry bar he kept on the truck. The ice gave a little, and the thing inside shifted the way a coin does when it settles. Tully jogged up, her breath jumping from its mouth in pale ribs. What'd we hit? Marlin worked the bar under the edge of the ice. Concrete. Or hell, I don't know. The wedge he levered free was the size of a dinner plate. He flipped it into the snowbank. What had been trapped within toppled into his palm with a small clean tap, as if it had been waiting for exactly that sound. It was a doll's head. Porcelain, not plastic. White with that faint pink wash old toys carried on their cheeks. Its hair was not hair, but a crown of painted curls, glazed into place. The mouth was a small bow, a whisper of red. The eyes were open. One was a blue so pale it approached grey. The other was brown, deep, and almost golden, like a thawed pine needle held up to light. Marlin stared at it for a long breath. Nope, he said at last, and tried to place it back on the ice as if he'd never touched it. The head rolled once and came to rest facing the road. Its mismatched eyes took the sky without reflection. Tully let out a laugh that sounded like a choke. Man, that's messed. Marlin crouched again. He didn't want to leave it. He didn't want to take it. A third option formed in that practical part of him that had buried deer off the shoulder and once a stray dog when no one claimed it. He hauled the ice back into the gouge, tossed snow and stamped it down. The head lay on the crown where his boot couldn't quite cover it. "Get in the truck," he said. "We'll push it under." Tully didn't move. "Maybe we should call someone." "Who?" Marlin asked, and did not mean it as a joke. "The county sheriff." He was in a cabin 6 miles east, snowed in, radioing the roads closed. The mayor? He would be in bed until 8, then behind his counter at the hardware store, pretending the town had nothing to fear. The elders? Marlin felt a muscle in his cheek jump, although the cold had already tried to freeze his face stiff. The elders had opinions about everything. They would have opinions about this. He lifted his boot and pressed. The head sank to the lip of the roadbed. He fetched a trenching spade from the truck and chipped at the frozen dirt until there was a shallow cup. He placed the doll's head inside and covered it with hard snow like packing salt. In 30 minutes, the plow steel would smooth the seam, and no one would know what lay under 36 inches of county property. No one except whoever had put it there the first time. They finished the route with their windows down so the glass wouldn't fog and the cold would keep them sharp. Marlin thought he heard something through the tires, a faint click every time the truck crossed the patch spot. But he told himself it was just the blade bracket rattling. And after a while, he believed himself. At 7:30, they rolled into Main Street. Pine Hollow was waking, though that word meant less in winter. People did not wake so much as push themselves upright and pretend for 8 hours. The bakery's chimney speared out a pretzel of sweet smoke. The cafe's neon open flickered fitfully, the one letter dying and resurrecting. O-E-N, open, O-E-N, as if trying to learn the word again after a stroke. A tangle of children swaddled to their eyebrows trudged toward the school, breath like steam valves. Marlin parked in the lot between the town hall and the small white church. Tully clambered out and slapped his elbows like a crow trying to fly. "You ever see anything like that?" Marlin let the truck idle. "Seen worse," he lied. "Go inside and sign the sheet." Inside the town hall, the radiator clanked like it was chewing on rocks. A corkboard held notices that never changed. Hunting hours. A poster for last year's pancake breakfast. A sheet asking for volunteer readers at the library that had been closed since September. The mayor, Hank Tolliver, a thin man with a sweater that always looked like it had just been put on wrong, stood at the counter doing math on a legal pad. He looked up and smiled in the way that says, "There you are. The man who keeps me from telling the truth about how small my town has become." "Morning, Marlin," Howard said. "Roads." "Open enough," Marlin said, signing his name with fingers that refused to obey. "There's a drift near the North Ridge. I'll treat it again after 10. "Festival flyers came in," Hank said, as if there were not a glacier under every word. "We'll need you to hang the lanterns on Birch Street this afternoon. Kids like to see 'em up." Marlin nodded. The Festival of Stillness had always required work. You shoveled, you salted. You hung the lanterns, though they were never lit. You turned the church bell rope into a no-touch artifact and placed a ribbon over the organ keys. You told the little ones that Santa liked quiet towns best. Tully stood steaming near the radiator and looked at the flyers. a paper snowflake border, and the words in block capitals. Festival of Stillness. Christmas Eve. Dusk to the dawn. Please observe silence. No lights, no music, for safety, for peace. It's kind of, Tully fluttered his fingers for a word. Creepy. Hank's smile got tighter, which meant friendlier. Part of our heritage. Eleanor Reed reached Pine Hollow with a suitcase that clicked when you tipped it. Ceramic, she told herself, not bone. The bus left her at a stop that was only a wooden bench high enough to keep your thighs off the snow. The driver, a man with polite grief behind his eyes, set her suitcase down and said, "Ma'am," touching the brim of a hat he wasn't wearing. The bus's taillights went away in the slow, reluctant way of reluctant promises. The cold took her first. She'd grown up in Kingston, taught in Sudbury, even tried Vancouver for a year believing ocean wind had some kind of mercy in it. But Pine Hollow's cold was a separate thing. Not an element, but a decision. It pressed her skin into her bones, and her bones into some smaller idea of herself. She dragged the suitcase along the ploughed lip of Birch Street. Houses sat close together like old friends at a funeral. The sky was the colour of paper kept too long in a damp box. She passed a bakery where the glass was fogged from the inside, and a sign said, "Hot bread," in a hand that had learned the letters generations ago. She passed a church with a rope that hung like the tail of a dead horse in its belfry. In the window of the hardware store, a sleigh bell wreath. No bells. Just circles of leather straps studded with brass so polished she could see a fisheye version of herself in them as she went by. A woman in her late 30s with a hat that made her look braver than she felt. Her rental, temporary until the school board released funds for lodgings, was the upstairs of a narrow white house with a side porch and steps whose paint had peeled back like bark. The key was under a brick the landlord had not tried to hide well. Inside, the heat had been turned to a number rather than to warmth. But the place was clean in the way of rooms that only see daylight in winter. She set the suitcase on the bed. It clicked again. Eleanor hadn't intended to bring the teacup. It had simply ended up wrapped in sweaters between her books. The teacup had belonged to someone else. She had bought it at a church sale, then never used it. A therapist once told her that grief makes you steal things that feel like the shape of what you lost. Eleanor didn't argue. She didn't go back to that therapist either. On the small round table near the window lay a note in looping cursive, "Welcome, Miss Reed. Groceries in the icebox. Pilot light for the stove is tricky. Tap the iron twice with the wooden spoon. Your classroom key is labeled 7B. H. Tolliver, Mayor." She smiled despite the cold. A mayor who put groceries in your refrigerator felt like fiction, cozy or dangerous. She put the note in her pocket because paper felt like company. She walked to the school after her breath stopped feeling like a thing she needed to defend. The children's voices reached her before the building did, a chorus of them. Not singing, simply making the long oval sounds children make when air is a toy. The school was brick, with an addition that looked like someone had grafted a box onto a pulled tooth. A metal wreath hung over the door. No ribbon, no collar. Inside, Mother Hall smelled of crayons and floor wax, her favorite perfume. She found 7B by counting doorways. She knew already which of her students would count that way too. The door stuck at the top right corner as if it were reluctant to open into winter. She put her shoulder to it, and it gave with a tiny sound like a girl's laugh caught in a jar. Room 7B was a rectangle with high windows and a blackboard pitted into constellations by 50 years of chalk. Desks, 20 of them, had been arranged into 2 horseshoes, like arms ready to hold. On the sill, a stack of readers about a rabbit who learned to share and a squirrel who learned to be brave. Eleanor touched the rabbit book with a passed-over tenderness that embarrassed her even alone. She had wanted a child once. Her body had wanted one until the wanting felt like a second heartbeat. Then it stopped wanting, the way a clock stops when someone moves the house. She set her bag on the teacher's desk and took out the 3 things that made any room hers. A fountain pen, a small plant that could survive anything but direct hatred, and a photograph of a shoreline taken at dusk. The shoreline had been the last place her husband stood without thinking about standing. She placed the photograph face down because the light was wrong here for his memory. A soft knock came at the door, and Eleanor turned with the particular alertness of new teachers who cannot yet distinguish between knocks that mean trouble and knocks that mean muffins. A woman in a red coat stood there. The coat was the most decisive color she had seen since getting off the bus. The woman's hair was silver in a way that looked like a choice rather than an inevitability. She held out a pie in a tin and a smile like a candle that had been relit after wind. "Welcome," the woman said. "I'm Ruth Delaney. We live across from you. Birch, 2 doors down. I taught here once, when the desks were bolted to the floor and the chalk was made of dust that wanted to be in your lungs forever." Eleanor felt warmth for the first time. Eleanor Reed? That pie. Goodness. "Apple," Ruth said. "Best eaten cold in this town. Everything is best eaten cold here." She glanced around the classroom as if taking attendance. "If you need anything, salt stories, the names we don't say out loud." "Come." Eleanor laughed because she thought Ruth wanted her to. "The names we don't say out loud." Ruth's smile thinned in a way that was not unkind. "Every place has them." Children padded past the door like small deer. Boy with hair like a Brillo pad stopped and stared at the plant as if it might ask him to spell his name. Eleanor waved. He did not wave back, but he did not flee. She considered it a win. "May I ask," Eleanor said, "about the festival?" The mayor mentioned it. The Festival of Stillness. Ruth's posture changed almost imperceptibly, as if a weight had been set on her shoulders that she was practiced at carrying. "It's a quiet night. We keep to our houses. We don't make a fuss." "No lights?" "No lights," Ruth said softly. "No singing either." Eleanor thought of candlelight services at St. Andrew's. The way the sound threaded through December like gold drawn thin. No carols. Ruth looked at the far wall, where someone long ago had painted a winter mural of children skating in silhouettes. Once, she said, we sang. Now we keep the night's shape. She shifted the pie to her other hand. You'll receive a package. Everyone does their first December. She watched Eleanor's face in the pause that followed. If it comes before anyone has had a chance to explain, put it in a cupboard or the oven. The corner of her mouth tilted. Don't turn the oven on. Eleanor waited for the laugh that would make it a joke. Ruth didn't offer one. The older woman touched Eleanor's elbow lightly, the precise brief pressure nurses use to remind you that your body and the bed it lies in are separate things. Welcome, she said again, and left with the sound of her boots learning the hallway. Eleanor opened her cupboard that evening and found a box wrapped in red paper. The edges were sharp, the paper thick and old-fashioned. She lifted it carefully. No tag, no writing, no hint of who had left it. Remembering Ruth's warning, she put the box inside the oven and closed the door gently. It was ridiculous, she knew, but it was also late, and ridiculousness is a kind of insurance when you live alone in a new place. By morning, snow had risen against the windowsills, and the air inside smelled faintly metallic. She went to school early, the world quiet except for her boots on the path. The children were subdued. They talked about the festival in half whispers. When she asked what they did for fun that night, no one answered. At lunch, Ruth appeared again, wrapped in her red coat. Do you have candles? She asked. I thought we weren't allowed light. No lights in the windows, Ruth said, but a candle behind a curtain is for comfort, not for seeing. Keep one lit if the quiet grows too heavy. Eleanor smiled awkwardly. You talk about quiet as if it's something alive. Ruth didn't smile back. In Pine Hollow, it is. By dusk, the whole town had retreated indoors. Even the dogs seemed to know better than to bark. Eleanor sat in her chair, a single candle burning on the table, its light too thin to warm anything. Across the street, Ruth's window glowed faintly for a few minutes, then went dark. When the last streetlight blinked out, the silence changed. It became physical. Air thick enough to slow her pulse. She tried to read, but couldn't hear the turning of the pages. The clock on the mantel had stopped. 3 soft knocks came at her door. She froze, breath shallow. A child's voice whispered her name. She didn't move. The voice came again, a little nearer the woods. Eleanor. It's cold. Her skin prickled. Ruth, she tried, but her words made no sound. Her voice had vanished into the air. The handle turned once and stopped. Something pressed against the door. 3 soft taps. Deliberate, like a child testing if someone is home. Eleanor held her breath until the air in her lungs burned. When the pressure lifted, she dared to breathe. The room returned to its waiting stillness. She didn't sleep. At some point near dawn, she heard a faint scraping in the kitchen. When she went to check, the oven door was slightly ajar, the box no longer where she'd left it. In its place lay a porcelain doll's head, pale and perfect, eyes mismatched, one blue, one brown. Eleanor told herself the doll was a prank, someone from the school or the mayor trying to play with the newcomer. She placed it on the table, covering it with a dish towel like a thing to be ignored. But every time she walked past it, she felt the sense of being observed. That day the children were quiet again. The snow against the classroom windows looked solid, like pressed milk. She decided to teach them a song, something light-hearted, to shake off the feeling in her bones. She wrote the words on the board. Sleep, little snowbird. Rest your wings. The children began to sing softly, but the words changed as they sang, sliding into something older. Sleep, little mother, wake not yet. The voices joined perfectly, as if rehearsed it for generations. Eleanor clapped her hands sharply, and they stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than before. What were you singing? She asked. They looked at her confused. The song, one said. The one you wrote. She played back the tape recorder she kept for music lessons that evening. Their voices filled the room again, but under the song came something else. Whispering, like wind through reeds. She slowed the tape. The whisper became words. Do not teach them to wake her. Eleanor snapped it off. She spent that night at the kitchen table, the doll under the towel beside her. Around midnight, she heard a sound from the floor below, a single click, porcelain against wood. She pulled the towel back. The doll's eyes were open, reflecting the candlelight. When she reached for it, a bead of moisture ran from its blue eye to its cheek. A tear, clear and slow, leaving behind a faint crack in the glaze. She stepped away. The house seemed to breathe. The next morning, Owen, the quiet boy with pale hair, did not come to class. The mayor said his family had gone to visit relatives. Ruth said nothing. That night, more snow fell. Eleanor woke to faint singing beneath her floorboards. She followed the sound to the attic steps. The knob was cold as bone. When she opened the door, dust fell like ash. The room smelled faintly of burned varnish and candle wax. She found, half buried beneath the boards, the upper half of a child's desk. Old, charred, initials carved deep into the wood. Beside it lay another doll's torso, its face gone, arms missing. The whisper came from behind her. Teacher! She spun, candle shaking. Nothing there, only her own heartbeat, far too loud in the dark. The following day, Eleanor could barely speak. Her throat felt coated in frost. The children looked paler, their eyes unfocused, as if they hadn't slept. During lessons, she noticed they flinched whenever she wrote on the chalkboard. Even the chalk seemed reluctant to touch the surface. At lunch, Ruth appeared in her red coat, face drawn. Did you receive it? She asked. The doll, Eleanor said. Ruth nodded once. Good. Leave it where it is. Don't give it back to the snow. I found another one, Eleanor whispered. In the attic. Ruth's lips pressed together. Then it remembers you. That evening, Eleanor tried to sleep, but the house was alive with subtle sounds. Wood stretching, distant tapping, the sigh of someone too polite to knock. Near midnight she heard slow steps above her. Not mice, heavier, patient. She rose, lit her candle, and climbed. The attic door was ajar, warm light seeping through the crack, though she'd never wired a bulb up there. She opened it. Inside, the dust was gone. The space had transformed. Rows of tiny desks gleamed faintly in the candlelight. Dolls sat at each one, heads bowed as if waiting for a lesson. At the front stood the cracked doll from her kitchen, whole again, its mismatched eyes glinting. Eleanor's voice trembled. "Who are you?" A soft whisper rippled through the dolls, like breath across reeds. Words formed, layered, distant. Mother. Quiet mother. The candle flame elongated, bending toward the nearest doll as if drawn. She backed away, heart pounding. Her sleeve brushed a desk, and all the doll heads lifted at once, glassy eyes turning in unison. She fled, stumbling down the steps, slamming the door. The knob burned her palm with cold. She pressed her back against the wall until dawn, listening for movement above. When she finally stood, her knees nearly gave out. At school, the janitor, Amos Pike, watched her with concern. "You're pale, Miss Reed," he said. "You been up to the attic?" Her mouth opened, but he didn't wait for an answer. "Best leave that door alone. It remembers too much." "What do you mean?" "It used to be the orphanage dormitory," he said softly, "before the fire." The word fire hung in the air, like soot. Eleanor couldn't focus the rest of the day. Each time she looked at the children, she saw brief flickers in their eyes, tiny reflections of flame that vanished when she blinked. That night, sleep was impossible. At some hour between midnight and morning, something small and cold settled at the foot of her bed. A child's voice whispered, "Mom." Eleanor froze. The weight lifted. When she gathered the courage to look, nothing was there, except a faint indentation on the blanket, shaped like a small hand. The festival arrived like a storm that had been waiting its whole life to happen. By evening, snow fell straight down, no wind to guide it, the world turning whiter by the minute. Pine Hollow retreated indoors. No lights, no songs, no words. Every window sealed, every voice hidden. Eleanor sat in her small living room, wrapped in a wool blanket. The single candle she'd allowed herself burned low. She'd meant to keep quiet, but quiet had stopped feeling like peace. It was pressure, dense as water. The stillness outside was so absolute, she could hear her own heartbeat against the glass. She wrote in her notebook, "Silence isn't empty. It's listening." The clock on the wall had stopped again. She rose to wind it, but before she reached it, the air shifted. A low vibration rolled through the floorboards, more felt than heard. It wasn't machinery. It was something alive. The vibration grew into a pulse, and beneath it, a hum. The sound of many voices humming one note, perfectly still. She went to the window. Outside, the town had vanished under snow. Yet through the white veil she saw shapes moving. Small, slow, deliberate. Children. They walked in single file, each carrying something pale that gleamed faintly in the dark. Dolls. They stopped at every doorstep, setting the dolls down gently before moving on. When they reached her house, one figure broke from the line and came to stand directly outside her window. It was child-sized, but wrong. Too slender. Its head tilted too far to one side. It lifted a hand and pressed it to the glass. Frost spread from its fingers outward in perfect spirals. Eleanor stumbled back. The candle guttered but didn't go out. The handprint remained.
Midnight came, and with it a knock. 3 soft taps on her door.
Not desperate, polite. "Eleanor," said a voice from the other side. Her breath caught. It was her husband's voice. She stood frozen. The voice came again. Quiet. Pleading. "Eleanor, it's so cold. Let me in." Her throat went dry. She backed away, shaking her head, whispering, "You're not him." "Yes, I am." The voice softened. "You promised you'd wait for me." Her hand reached the doorknob before she realized what she was doing. The dolls in the window turned their heads toward her. The soft click of porcelain filled the room, every doll in rhythm, their glassy eyes catching candlelight. She froze. "Please," the voice said, "open the door." Something cold brushed her neck. She turned, and in the mirror across the room, she saw herself not alone. A tall figure stood behind her, hands resting on her shoulders. Its face was smooth, featureless. Its reflection the absence of one. When she spun around, nothing was there. The knocking grew louder, faster, in time with her pulse. The candle flared, then died. "Eleanor," the voice murmured through the darkness. "Why won't you listen?" She screamed. The moment the sound escaped her throat, everything changed. The air collapsed. The silence that held Pine Hollow shattered. A violent gust rushed through the house, though no door had opened. The snow outside lifted and twisted into spirals. The bell in the church tower, silent for 40 years, rang once, then cracked. And then silence again. When she opened her eyes, the door was ajar. Snow drifted in across the threshold. A small doll sat just inside, red-dressed, eyes mismatched, smiling faintly. The bell's broken note still throbbed behind her eyes when she woke. She was on the floor beside the open door, snow melting against her skin. The doll in the red dress sat upright a few feet away, balanced perfectly, despite the uneven boards. Her breath rose and fell in shallow bursts. When she shut the door, it didn't latch. The cold in the house had changed. It wasn't weather anymore. It was presence. She made coffee that tasted like metal. The radio hissed static, and beneath it, she could swear she heard breathing. She turned it off and sat for an hour, listening to nothing. By midday, she went to the school. The building was unlocked, though she knew she had locked it. The halls were empty, coats hung on pegs still damp, as if the owners had stepped out for recess and forgotten to return. The blackboard in her classroom held the same phrase she had written days ago, but the chalk lines were thicker, fresh. Sleep, little mother, wake not yet. Ruth appeared in the doorway, her face pale. They stayed home, she said quietly. Everyone. Why? Eleanor asked. The bell rang. Ruth's eyes held something deeper than fear. Now it's awake. Eleanor gripped the edge of her desk. What is? Ruth hesitated. The quiet mother. She hears what should be silence. That night, Eleanor tried to plan lessons, but her hand refused to obey. The letters she wrote rearranged themselves on the page. Mother is listening. She tore the sheet and threw it in the stove. The smoke rose straight upward, grey and word-shaped. The doll sat on the table. She turned it to face the wall. But when she glanced up again, it faced her once more. Sometime after midnight, she dreamed of her husband standing in the snow outside the school. You brought her back, he said, voice soft and wrong. You finally listened. She woke screaming, heart hammering, the doll beside her on the pillow. She hurled it across the room. Porcelain shattered against the wall. She dropped to her knees shaking. The fragments began to move. One by one they slid across the floor, fusing again into the shape of the doll. It sat upright, unbroken. A thin crack now running down its face. From inside that crack, something blinked. Eleanor pressed her hands to her temples. You're not real, she whispered. Your grief, your guilt.
The doll's lips parted. No sound came, but in her mind she heard the words clearly. Then why do you keep listening?
She screamed again and struck it with the fire poker until it turned to dust. The silence afterward was perfect. Then the house breathed. Every doll in the windows turned inward. Their black seed eyes shimmered faintly. What do you want? She whispered. The answer came from the dust, from her chest, from everywhere. To be remembered. And underneath, a smaller voice. To be heard. Snow erased the world by morning. The windows were blind, the glass pressed white from outside. Eleanor could no longer tell if it was day or night. Time had turned into something trapped in a jar, shaking but never escaping. The doll's dust remained where she'd left it, though overnight it had formed delicate rings, as if frost itself had written. She didn't touch it. Disturbing, it felt like speaking in a language she didn't want to know. A knock came at her door around what might have been noon. Ruth stood there wrapped in her red coat, her face drawn and older somehow. You shouldn't be alone, she said. I'm fine, Eleanor lied. Ruth looked past her shoulder, eyes landing on the dust pattern. No, she said quietly. You're listening too closely. Eleanor didn't deny it. The house had a pulse now, faint, steady, almost kind. Where are the children? She asked. School was empty. Ruth's jaw tightened. Safe enough if we stay quiet. But she's stirring again. The ones she claimed start to wander. Eleanor frowned. Claimed? The orphans from the old home, Ruth said. The ones the fire took. Every few winters they come back. Not to harm us. They're just lost.
Eleanor stepped closer. You believe that? Ruth met her eyes. I've seen them.
That night, the air turned blue with cold. Eleanor sat at her classroom desk, candlelight pooling on her papers. The world outside was still. Then, soft tapping on the window. At first she thought it was branches, but the trees were bare. The tapping continued. She looked up. Small faces pressed against the glass glass. Children's faces blurred by frost. Their eyes were dark wells. They smiled, and their breath fogged the glass. She stumbled backward. The candle fell, wax splashing on the floor. You're not real, she whispered. One of the faces spoke without sound. Its lips formed the words, "You woke her." Eleanor ran forward and struck the glass with her palm. "Go away!" The faces only laughed, a silent ripple of mirth like snow slipping from a roof. Then, one by one, they faded back into the stone. When she looked down at her hands, her skin had gone pale. Veins, faint blue lines under translucent skin. The next day she found Marlin in the hallway, his beard white with frost. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "They're out." "The children?" He nodded. "The lost ones. Every time the bell rings, it opens the ground wider." "Why doesn't anyone stop it?" He sighed. "We tried. Once." "Oh, He handed her something wrapped in cloth. Inside lay a curved shard of porcelain with one painted eyelash. "The first doll," he said. It remembers her name." Eleanor's fingers trembled. "Whose name?" Marlin didn't answer. The lights flickered and the air dropped to freezing. "They're here," he whispered. Outside figures moved through the storm. Dozens of them. Small, bent, carrying shadows in their arms. Dolls. Their lips moved in rhythm. Hush, hush, hush. "Don't let them in," Marlin said, "no matter what voice you hear." A knock came almost instantly. 3 soft taps on the classroom door. A child's voice. "Miss Reed?" "We're cold." Marlin's eyes widened. "Don't!" But the voice sounded like Ian's, and her body betrayed her. Her fingers turned the knob. Cold air rushed in, blinding her. The hallway beyond was empty. Then slowly, shapes emerged. Children. Pale and silent. Walking barefoot through snow that hadn't melted. Ian stood among them, holding a porcelain doll against his chest. Eleanor dropped to her knees. "Ian!" she breathed. "What happened?" He tilted his head, smiling faintly. "We kept quiet. Now it's your turn!" Behind him, more children filled the hallway, their breaths clouding the air in unison. The sound they made wasn't speech. It was a hum, the same lullaby she'd heard in dreams. Eleanor reached toward Ian. "I can help you." His eyes softened for an instant. "Help her instead," he whispered. The lights went out. The church bell rang once, faint and cracked. When it stopped, the children were gone. Only the dolls remained, lined neatly along the floor, each with one cracked eye. The storm didn't end. It simply changed shape. Snow no longer fell from the sky. It rose from the ground, drifting upward like reversed ash. The streets had vanished beneath a seamless white skin. Eleanor stood at the window, her candle guttering beside her. The town looked like a painting that had been half erased. In that silence, she realized the snow wasn't falling at all. It was breathing. The dolls from the hallway were gone. Only the faint impressions of their small bodies remained in the dust. Her house smelled of wax and something faintly sweet, like decay pretending to be perfume. There was nowhere left to go. Ruth's windows were dark. Marlin's truck sat half buried at the corner of Birch Street. Driver's door open, seat dusted in snow. She wrapped herself in her coat and stepped into the street. The air was heavy and warm, the kind of warmth that didn't comfort. Every footstep sank deep but made no sound. The quiet wasn't absence, it was attention. At the schoolhouse steps, she stopped. The door stood open. Inside, a dim orange light pulsed like a heartbeat. She entered. The hall smelled of wax and wood smoke. Her candlelight caught shapes on the walls, drawings she hadn't made. Children's scrawls in charcoal and ash, circles with eyes, dolls holding hands, a woman's figure towering over them. At the end of the hall, the attic door yawned open, light spilling from within. Eleanor climbed the stairs, every step creaking like a confession. The attic had changed again. No dust, no ruin. The rows of desks were back, each occupied by a porcelain doll, their heads tilted in unison as if waiting for instruction. A faint humming filled the air. Soft, soothing, like a mother crooning to her child. At the center of the room sat a woman with her back turned, long grey hair braided down her spine. The folds of her dress were grey, her posture both regal and broken. Eleanor's voice came out as a whisper. "Who are you?" The humming stopped. The woman answered without turning. "You know who I am. You've spoken my name." Eleanor's throat closed. "The Quiet Mother." The woman turned and the candlelight trembled. Her face was both beautiful and wrong. Porcelain pale, cracked along the jaw, her eyes mismatched. One blue, one brown, the same eyes as the doll. "I cared for them," the Quiet Mother said softly. "They were hungry and cold, and I gave them warmth. The town wanted quiet, so I gave them that too." She gestured at the dolls. "Now they are safe. They never wake. They never cry." Eleanor shook her head. "They're dead." "They're remembered," the Quiet Mother said. "The town made a bargain, a silence for safety. They broke it when they taught their children to sing again. And so I returned. Eleanor stepped forward, the candle trembling in her hand. You killed them! I preserved them. The woman's cracked lips curved into something like pity. You don't understand. I kept them from vanishing. Would you have done less for your own child? The words struck something deep. The air thickened. Eleanor could smell smoke, the ghost of a nursery fire, the scent of what had been lost. What happens if I refuse you? She asked. The quiet mother smiled faintly. Then I collect you too. The dolls began to hum. The sound grew soft at first, then swelling until it filled her skull. Eleanor's knees buckled. The flame on her candle twisted sideways, fighting to stay alive. The quiet mother rose, gliding toward her. Hush now. You've spoken enough for one life. Eleanor lifted the candle between them. I won't be part of this. You already are, the quiet mother said gently. She reached out. Her hand was cold marble on Eleanor's cheek. The flame died. Darkness rushed in. The humming grew louder, vibrating through the walls, the floor, her chest. The doll's eyes glowed faintly in the dark, hundreds of small suns staring at her. Then the light returned. The attic was empty. Dust. Broken desks. Silence. At her feet lay the red box. Eleanor opened it with shaking hands. Inside, the porcelain doll looked brand new. Its face uncracked, its eyes shining. Its tiny mouth moved once. Soon. Eleanor did not remember leaving the attic. One moment she was staring into the doll's perfect face, and the next she was outside, barefoot in the snow, her nightdress clinging to her legs. The school behind her loomed dark against the sky. Above, a light pulsed faintly through the clouds, not the sun, not the moon, something older. The snow beneath her feet was warm. The air was still. Pine Hollow lay silent. Not the silence of sleep, but the silence of held breath. She walked through it slowly. Every doorstep had a doll sitting upon it. Red dresses vivid almost against the white. Each doll watched her pass. She could feel them through the air, tiny heartbeats like ticking clocks. When she reached the church, its door stood open, glowing with a faint light. She stepped inside. Candles burned on every pew. The dolls sat in neat rows facing the altar. At the center, the red box waited. Eleanor approached it. Is this what you wanted? She whispered. The air trembled. The quiet mother's voice answered from everywhere and nowhere. I wanted silence. You brought me noise. You sang the children awake. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. They were already awake. You just didn't want to hear them. The candles flickered. The dolls began to hum again. The same soft tune. Sleep, little mother. Rest your eyes. The quiet mother appeared behind the altar, her porcelain face glowing in the candlelight. Give me your voice, she said. Give me quiet again. Eleanor understood then. The curse could be ended only by silence freely given. She took a breath that tasted like winter and said her final words. Let them be children again. The quiet mother reached out, fingers cold against Eleanor's lips. The world went still. Sound folded into itself and vanished. When morning came, Pine Hollow woke to clear skies for the first time in years. The storm was gone, leaving snow that glittered like glass. People opened their doors cautiously, blinking against the light. The air was bright and harmless. They spoke, but no sound came from their mouths. They tried again and again, but nothing. Panic rippled through the streets until they realized no one needed to speak. The stillness itself felt kind, peaceful. At the church, the candles still burned. The pews were empty. On the altar sat the red box, sealed with a white ribbon. None dared to open it. Ruth stood by the door, tears frozen on her cheeks. She did it, she whispered, though even her whisper made no sound. She gave her voice for us. In the months that followed, life in Pine Hollow went on quietly. The children played softly in the snow. No one raised their voice. No one sang. But sometimes, just before dawn, if you stood outside the church and listened very closely, you could hear a faint hum, the sound of a woman's voice singing to someone she could no longer seek. Sleep, little mother. Rest your eyes. We remember what silence buys. A year later, a bus rolled into Pine Hollow, carrying a new teacher named Margaret Hale. The mayor met her at the stop. Welcome, he said, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It's a peaceful town. Peaceful sounds perfect, she said. He walked her to a white house on Birch Street. A small parcel waited on the porch, neatly wrapped in brown paper and tied with white string. The tag read, "To the kind teacher, Merry Christmas." She carried it inside, set it on the table, and unpacked her things. That night, she made tea, looked out the window, and saw that every house on the street had a little white doll hanging in its window, watching the snow. She smiled. "Charming," she said softly. The wind outside whispered her name. She turned curious. The package still sat on the table waiting. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small wooden box, painted red. It opened easily. Inside lay a porcelain doll in a white dress. One blue eye, one brown. Its tiny mouth curved into a knowing smile. Margaret laughed quietly. "How lovely." She placed it on the windowsill, facing outward. Behind her, the doll blinked once. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Sleep, little mother. Rest your eyes. We remember what silence buys. And the snow kept falling forever.